All right. Okay. We can go ahead and get started, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, we'll begin with Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. How are we doing today? Right. So before we, and I'm going to try to keep my attention focused in the room as best as I can as I look at Zoom and YouTube to see what comments are coming in, inshallah. But I want to start off by, first of all, thanking you for joining us this afternoon or this evening. And secondly, the thing I want to do is to find out if there are any questions that you had coming out of the conversation last week. Did you leave with any questions that you want to bring to the forefront today, you want to highlight today, or anything like that? Oh.
You said you had 17 points to go over?
No. It was 17 pages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it like online so where you can go and actually see it?
No. So good. Yeah, good question. So the question was is when I mentioned last week that I had some other information to share, is that online summit note. Those were my notes that outline the series or parts of the series. The topic for today is conflict resolution among the youth, with the youth, and the youth. Whatever proposition we want to use in the middle there, right? But it's all about conflict resolution and youth. So my intention for today is to make it as much of a workshop as possible. So semi-lecture, semi-workshop, right? Because we have folks in this room who might be considered more youth than me, right? So I want to involve you in this conversation. And for the folks online, what I'll do is that as people are saying things in the room, I'll try to repeat it so that you're actually hearing it and receiving it online, inshallah. How does that sound, folks? Is that okay? All right. I'll ask once more before I move on. Any questions coming out of last week that you want to raise today? So when you heard, because you saw the flyer, conflict resolution and the youth or something along those lines, when you heard that topic, what did you come today hoping to at least hear about? What are some things that you came with as your goals for today's session? Like you came, you know what? I hope we talk about this, that, and the other. What did you come hoping to hear about? How to stop the shooting. That's big. Okay. How to stop the shooting. What else? All right, as parents, how to better communicate with the youth in the family to better understand the issues and support them, right? What else? How to work on the disconnect between the youth and the elders, all right? Okay. What else? Please. All right. How can the youth respectfully deal with conflict with parents? All right, solid. What else? I think maybe two more, and then we can push forward from there. Anything else you came with hoping that we covered? All right. Help youth manage conflict among themselves. All right. Any other goals or hopes? So this is what I have, right? How to stop the shooting, how to, or steps towards that. For parents to learn how to better communicate, support for parents to learn how to better communicate with their youth, how to address the disconnect between the youth and the elders, how can the youth respectfully deal with conflict with parents, and how to help or support the youth manage conflict among themselves. Those are very, very good, good topic, right? Good topics or goals for today's conversation. The one that was mentioned, the disconnect between the youth and the elders, I may touch on that today, but we have the last session that is the intergenerational conflict. So I may leave that in general for that last session, if that's okay. That's cool. But we'll definitely be coming to it, but we'll be touching on it, I think in some way, shape, or form today, inshallah. The first one, stop the shooting. That's I'll mention some things that are happening in the city right now towards that, and then maybe bracket that with how the Muslim community can get involved or can figure out how to support some of those initiatives or what we can do to help navigate that. So I think, yeah, we can touch on that. We'll definitely look at stuff with that. So when Sidi, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, there is I didn't send it. Who should I send it to?
You listen to me, I'll send it to the three people that's asking me. I'm sorry. I haven't seen YouTube yet.
Nah, that's all right. You're good. All right. Let's see. The remind? Yeah. I could, but that's yeah, right now. Check your email. Yeah. And I'll so you got it? Hotmail.
I'm asking you.
Hotmail, I don't know. Outlook. Right, you don't say Hotmail out loud. All right. Cool. So from when this topic came up, right? It really falls into, in my mind, it fell into two categories, and one of them is, as I mentioned in the back, adults and youth figuring out how to manage and resolve conflict, and then I think Sister Siobhan mentioned it, right? Supporting the youth in conflict resolution among themselves. So a lot of my conversations today would center on those two broad categories, but I'll weave in some of the other goals that have been mentioned. When we think of conflict, and I'm using this approach for this topic in particular, when we think of it, I want us to think of it as what can we do before, so in preparation for conflict, because we know that conflict will happen, right? It's impossible for it not to happen, right? So conflict is inevitable. So what is the preparation we need to put in place before conflict emerges? What do we need to do while the conflict is ongoing? And how do we restore communities and restore relationships after the conflict has passed? So if we look at it from before, during, and after, that's how I'm sort of like setting up our conversation today for dealing with conflict with the youth. In general, in any conflict approach, looking at it before, during, and after becomes important, right? Because we look at what can we do before the conflict happens so that we can prepare ourselves as to how we want to act inside of the conflict, and then have a mindset as to what we want to do after the conflict. So to understand this with a very common analogy or very familiar analogy right now that we have, coming into Ramadan, we all had a plan as to what we want to do in Ramadan, right? Or many of us did. We planned for it, for how we wanted to behave when the difficulty of Ramadan hit us. And then now Ramadan is here. We are maintaining some of that, but we know in the midst of Ramadan, some of that gets tough. And we keep reminding ourselves of what we want to do during this month. And then in our minds, we have an idea of what we want to try to maintain or do after Ramadan, as much as we know that's difficult and that's tough. So it's the same concept, right? The same mind frame. What we do before, during, and after when things are difficult. Right, I'm meeting some Zoom folks. So before we even get into that, I want to ask some questions. And this is for the folks online. If you type it into the chat, I'll definitely see what you're putting in, inshallah. Yeah, let's see what this question gives us. So my question to you is this. When you think about your preteens, your teen years, and this for the teens as well as the older adults in the room, right? When you think of your preteens and your teen years, what did conflict resolution or conflict management training or education look like to you? What did you get? How were you trained or taught to manage conflict? And this could be for the youth or even the adults or the older folks in the room. What was your training around conflict? Stop and think. That's what you're told. Stop and think. About what? Stop and think about your actions. What about them? Before it goes too far. So stop and think about your actions before it goes too far. How many of us have been told that? All right, good. Solid semester course, okay. What else? All right. So stop, think before it goes too far. I'm going to take note of some of these things. So this is actually really, really important. Stop and think before it goes too far. Find an adult. Find an adult. All right. What else? What else did you, how were you told or taught or trained to deal with conflict? I hear somebody say they were not. All right. You people in the room, be careful, bro. Just ignore it. All right. Talk it out.
It depends on your environment. Like say if you're home, you just watch. Okay, you just kind of like you learn just by watching. Or you in school, you just learn by watching, or you have a certain group of friends. But no one ever actually said it.
So you learn by watching, right? You pick up like how we pick up many other things from your environment. What else? Active listening. If there's for the food, tell him he can wait and go fit in a little bit. You're good. You're good. You'll be all right. You could no. I mean, you can sit and wait and go. We can go for it later. It's fine. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Active listening. All right. What else? Consider the other person's perspective. And that was something that I learned growing up as a preteen or teen. All right. Anything else? How many of you growing up, and I'm looking online, I'm not seeing anything online, all right? How many of you growing up, you didn't really get any knowledge or training or any in-depth direction on how to deal with conflict? Yeah. Right, if you look around the room, the majority of the folks in here, you didn't pop your hands, right? Okay. Someone hit this one. All right, so majority of the folks, right? And that's normal, right? That is normal. That even among ourselves as Muslims, one thing that we are often told is, hey, you know what? Be a good Muslim. That highway is this wide, right? The highway to be a good Muslim is this wide. Yeah. So doing that, be patient, doesn't really tell us much, right? That doesn't really give us a lot of the tools to deal with conflict. So I bring that back to us, right? As we look around our communities and our societies, as we look around and we ask ourselves, why aren't they dealing with conflict a certain way? If we use our room, our group here, as a microcosm of the larger community, we understand that most of us don't really get much training, understanding, education around conflict. We know it's there, we know it happens, and we are told general good things, but general things that we don't know how to activate, how to act on. Be nice, share with them, don't argue, don't fight. You know, that's your brother, that's your sister. Be nice to them. What do you want Allah? What do you want? When you want Allah to forgive you? When do you want the Prophet to love you? All of these things, right, that we are told to encourage good behavior. You know better, right? You know better, right? Didn't I tell you before? So all of these things, right? But really, that is not telling us to a certain extent how to manage conflict. And this is not blaming anyone. Understand something? This is not blaming anyone. This is not dumping on anyone or anything on his. It's just our approach to conflict has very seldom been in our communities and stuff like that, and even our families, really talking about, hey, conflict is this, and this is how we try to manage it, right? Or these are the different types of things you will encounter. This is how we try to manage it. So please don't be surprised by some of these types of response, and why, to a certain extent, even as we get older, and we'll touch on this later on in our when we go next week and we talk about relationships or conflict among our families, why many of us don't have some of the skills to manage conflict in our families and our personal lives. Because again, we understand it one way. Zaina. Yeah. So yes. So that was Zaina, you foretold what I'm about to sort of like try to tease out. No, but that's good, right? That if we are trying to support youth in managing their conflict, then we ourselves have to push ourselves to understand what conflict is and how to behave in conflict. Right? That if we don't have that, then it's very difficult to support youth in conflict. So let's look at our conflict without going into next week's discussion too far. Look at how we deal with conflict with our spouses, our siblings, our co-workers, our parents, whatever have you. How do we deal with it, right? And if the way we deal with it, we shut down, we block them, we cut them off, we put them on timeout, right? Put adults on timeout, what we do, right? We do all of these things, right? If that's all of the stuff we do, and we call all of those things dysfunctional behaviors, if we have a lot of dysfunctional behaviors around conflict management, what is our youth going to do? The same exact dysfunctional behaviors, and mind you, to a greater extreme. So the dysfunctional behaviors that we are seeing is so at greater extreme, because I think Qasim is going to touch on this in a second. The developmental stages of youth differ, right? That they don't see consequences and outcomes the same way older folks will see that, just because of psychological development. That's just a biological fact. So when we are looking at, you know what, I'm going to lay that person out as an adult, and then we think of consequences, youth may not think of consequences in the same way. So when we say also think about what will happen, we're asking them to do something to a certain extent that biology will not allow them to do to the fullest extent that we have in our minds. Because based on developmental psych, that's just not what happens in the majority of them. All right. I didn't do your whole thing yet. Okay. All right. How were you told to intervene in conflict when you saw it happening? There's another question for you. How were you taught? If you see two other people in conflict, what were you told to do? Mind your business. That does not concern you. Stay out of it. How many of you have been told that? All right. Or from school settings, call security. Right? That goes back to tell a parent, tell a third party. Anything else? Is that an addition? Yeah. What have you been told? If it's among family or siblings, what have you been told to do if you see your siblings fighting or your family members in an argument? What have you been told to do? If you can help, try to resolve it or tell a parent, right? Now, going back to the previous thing, right? How were you taught to manage conflict? Very limited, but hey, try to resolve it or tell a parent, right? So it's like you send a carpenter to build a house and he's never learned how to do carpentry. Fair enough? Or you send them and they have no tools and no idea how to get the tools. Right? We are setting ourselves up to a certain extent for struggles and challenges. Sister Murubiola. Sure? All right. So majority of us and our kids who are in the middle of conflicts have not had any intentional focus on managing conflict. We really have not. So we have been taught very good qualities: patience, love, compassion, mercy. We've been taught all of those things, but not really how to use those things in conflict. Right? So I want to start with we have a lot of good values that we've been given growing up as Muslims. But how do we then activate those values? I'm just watching you because that's how my eyes are falling. But how do we activate those values in the middle of conflict is something very different. So I know I'm doing a lot of setting up here, but now we're going to move into some content. So things we need to do prior to the conflict, and based on time, we might do prior and during. Things we need to do prior to, because prior is a lot, right? The first thing that when we talk about conflict, the first thing that we often talk about is emotions. The first thing we start off with is talking about emotions. I do this, so I won't be able to do it here, but I do this with my students. I ask them, I give them 45 seconds, and I ask them to write all of the emotions or the emotion words that they know. And the majority of my students come in somewhere around 8 or 9 emotions. That majority of them. So name some emotions for me, folks. Just shout them out for me. Some emotions. Anger. Frustration. Happiness. Irritation. Sadness. Sadness. Aggravation. Joy. Disappointment. Disappointment. Ambivalence. That's I need to spell ambivalence. Fear. What do you say, Kosa? Vengefulness. Vengefulness. Excitement. Excitement. Anxiety or anxiousness. All right. Anything else? that I'm missing? Love, hate, okay. Confidence, thank you. Worry, vulnerability, loneliness. All right, so these are good, right? Now look at the words that we got after we started thinking about it. How many of those words do we use regularly? We know happy, sad, angry, frustrated, and maybe fine. That is everything else. When we think of our emotional vocabulary, it is very stunted or very limited. So we have in education or in different space around conflict management, this thing called social and emotional learning, right? Where one of the first things, and many of you are in education, you've heard about this all the time, right? Or many times. One of the first things that you speak about is learning about emotions. Because, and the reason I want to put this out to you is this. If if something happens to our kids and they don't have the emotional vocabulary to say how they're feeling about what happened, and we try to intervene on it, we might be using the wrong tool to fix an emotion that we are misunderstanding. Let me lay it out a different way, because I have the examples that I want to use here, but I want to give me 2 minutes before I get to the examples, right? Somebody who looks sad and who looks disappointed, is it possible that they're going to look the same way? And if someone who is sad and disappointed, it's possible that they're going to look the same way. And we ask a child or we ask a youth, how are you feeling? They may say sad, but what they might be really feeling is disappointed. If someone is sad, the opposite of sad is what? So someone who is sad, we might try to make them happy. But if they're really disappointed, don't we need a different type of intervention? Yeah. But both of them look the same way. Emotional vocabulary, the emotion words that we use impact how we respond. And if we as adults don't understand the spectrum of emotions that we are navigating, then our kids and our youth won't be able to do that. So in many spaces, you see something called an emotion wheel that has at least 50 different emotion words, that 50 different emotion words that can be used, all coming out of some block emotions. So according to the research, one research study says that there are 12 categories of emotions, 12 categories, not 12 emotions, 12 categories of emotions. Another study that came out more recently said that there are 27 categories of emotions. Those are categories, not just emotion. 27 unique categories of emotions. And if I may, so I promise you, we're going to move a lot further. So the 27 unique categories: admiration, adoration, amusement, awe, boredom, calmness, confusion, disgust, entrapment, envy, excitement, fear, horror, interest, joy, romance, sadness. Each one of those is very different. But they're emotions that we feel and emotions that require a certain type of response. Fair enough? So this is why when we start talking about conflict resolution, one of the first things we talk about is emotions. Because emotions is the first thing we need to understand before we can even understand how to intervene in conflict involving us or involving others. There's a statement in our tradition that says, he who knows himself knows Allah. So I'm trying not to go into a segue here. You know, many of us have heard of emotional intelligence, right? And the first thing in emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And when we think of self-awareness, whoever you take it from, right, whether it be Goldman or Seligman or whoever you start off emotional intelligence with, right, the first thing in it is self-awareness. And that's why that statement in our tradition that says, he who knows himself knows Allah, is an important statement. Because one of the important things we need to know about ourselves is how we are feeling. The statement of the Prophet ﷺ, where he tells us don't get angry, right? That's an emotion that he's telling us about. How would we know that we're even approaching anger? We don't just jump into anger. Anger, according to them, is a secondary emotion. There are certain other emotions that precede anger. So how are we learning about our emotions in this moment? Right? When we ask our kids how are they feeling, if the only words they know are the 5 words that we know around emotions, then we're not really equipping our kids to deal with conflict when they get older. How is this landing for you all? How does this resonate? How are you feeling with what I'm saying right now? All right. Intrigue. You're a smart dude. You're testing me today. Say that again. Agreeable. All right. So that's where I want to start, right? That's where I want to start. So I'm going to give you some scenarios. So we are still focusing on youth. I'm going to give you some scenarios. And this is now this is us really digging into this now, right? I'm going to give you some scenarios and I'm going to pause after each one. And I want you to tell me what are some of the emotions a youth might be feeling when this scenario happens, right? Someone calls them out of their name. What are some things that they might feel? Disrespected, embarrassed, upset, annoyed, straight anger, right? 0 to 100, straight anger, insulted, right? So even before they get to anger, right? That insulting, especially if it's among people, right? It's but that insulted feeling can just gloss over right like that and jump straight to anger, right? But it's still happening because that anger is coming out of something. So all of those things that they're feeling, they're responding to every single possible emotion that they're feeling. So when they're in the mosque, in school, at home, out in the street, and someone calls them out of their name, all of those feelings they are feeling. And the response is where we trip ourselves up, because we are looking at how they responded to a feeling and we haven't even really processed how are we helping them learn how to deal with those feelings that they're having. What we are seeing in our communities are reactions to feelings and emotions. Fair enough? When we spoke about the shooting, when someone decides to engage in violence, isn't it a feeling or an emotion they're responding to? It is. It is. We don't act. Before any action, there is some sort of an emotive experience that happens. All right? So, a youth who feels insulted, what do they need? Say that again for me. They need what? They need to get. They need payback. All right. So that's what they were. So they need payback. All right. They need to retaliate. So that would be the response. What do they need to get back in balance? Emotion regulation is what they need to do. What do they need to get back in balance? They feel insulted. What do they need? reassurance, validation. You with me? Right? So for many of us, we look at processes, but we're not looking at when we have a feeling, and that feeling is something that takes away from us, something needs to be added back. Right, therapist? Something needs to be added back when something gets taken from us. Yeah? So you said insulted when they get called out of their names. What is another thing that they felt? Embarrassed. What do they need if you feel embarrassed? What do you need when you feel embarrassed? Security. Thank you. How do we let them know that, hey, you're safe? Affirmations, right? So listen, right now I know the way I'm coming off. I know that you want that this is what you want, right? And really, listen, take it. It's fine. It's fine. I'll get something back after this. And if you want to learn something more, and again, right, it's a safety thing, right? That I have seen brothers, or we've been in situations where people have pulled up to us and have tried to take something from us or tried to rough us up. And it's like, listen, if they're Muslim, sometimes they are, right? If you're real, either they are Muslim or they have Muslim in their family or their father. We know. Listen, you know what? It's cool. Go ahead. And at the same time, you know what? I was just down at the mosque and we were just talking about this. Because what we're doing is activating something else in them that reminds them of a value that they may have had. Right? And that again is depending on the situation in which we find ourselves. Right? So you call them out of their name. A feeling that I didn't hear us mention is they feel challenged. They feel challenged, like you're standing up, like, who do you think you are, right? So if someone is feeling challenged and we are standing up to them, then what they may need to feel in that moment is not that they don't have any power, but they need to feel like they have some sort of power in that situation. Because none of us want to feel powerless. Because the minute we start feeling powerless, we start doing things to grab power back. Fair enough? So if we are trying to grab power back, and this person who is feeling what they're feeling and they want what they want, and they're trying to get something from us, and we are trying to continue to take power away from them, they're going to keep pushing back and try to take power back. It is going to escalate. So how do we in that moment say, what does it look like to give this person back their power? Is this what you really want, or is there something else that you really want more than this? Listen, really, I have a place that I could come. If what you're looking for is money, really, let's go. I have something that I could do to help you with that. And you will be safe at the end of it. The reason why I'm saying this is this. For the past 2 months, we've been going around the city. Like two of my colleagues and I, we've been going around the city and in a number of these different youth groups. We have spoken to about 10 different programs so far. And these are preteens and teens, right? So some of them are even early 20s. And to a person, right, all of them are young black men, right? Young black men. And the question we ask them is about hope. What gives you hope in this city? And to a person, when we ask what gives you hope, guess what they say? Any guesses? Money. Few of them. To a person, when we ask them what gives them hope, it is somebody who is either running the program or someone who is helping them out. someone who they can call on day or night, whatever jam they find themselves in, that they can reach out to. It is people that they can rely on to support them in whatever they find themselves in. So I'm talking about some of them, they're in the program now, coming out of the life. Literally just come, they're like, we come here because this is where we find, this is where we're not getting into anything. This is where we're not getting into anything. Because outside there, I'm walking, I have my thing on me, but in here, I don't need to worry about that. Because in here, Fulan, so-and-so, I know that if I'm in a jam, if I'm outside there and I call them, they'll be right there for me. The thing that gives them hope are people who are there for them. So all of the things that we've been naming, it starts with people. Like, yes, money. Yes, all of these things. Yes, yes, yes. But those things pale in comparison to having somebody there who is really giving you the support that you need. Y'all are with me so far? And the way they speak about the people who give them that hope, who support them, is not that they're letting them do whatever they want. It's that they're holding them accountable, but they're treating them with respect. So that takes me to my next set of points. Well, no. Before I get to the next point, I have some other scenarios here, right? But I won't go through each of them because I think you get the point, right? Someone tells them that they're not intelligent, which happens often in school. Someone cheats them out of something, which happens a lot on the streets. Someone breaks a promise, which happens a lot in families. Yeah, all of these things bring out a bunch of different emotions, and all of these things cause conflict. And the youth are dealing with all of these things. So emotions is the biggest thing that I wanted to touch on before the conflict. Also before the conflict, understanding some boundaries on self-management. What does self-management mean? What does it mean to have restraint? What does forgiveness look like? What does protecting others look like? All of these things are things that we would learn about, talk about, or help each other understand even before we get into a conflict, so that when a conflict happens, we know how to lean into these things. But inside of the conflict, or when conflict is happening, some of the things that we need to keep in mind is, I just mentioned respect. So I want to spend a moment here. It is okay to allow our youth to disagree with us when the stakes aren't high. For some of us as adults, we have lived and we know, right? We know. So because I know and I have lived it, I want you to not have to make the same mistakes that I made. A fair thing, but somewhat unrealistic. So yes, there are things that we don't want our youth to experience, and at the same time, there are things that they have to experience to understand how to navigate it. So I'm saying that to mean this. When it comes to us helping our youth feel respected, we need to trust their decisions, even when it's a decision that we know has a potentially bad consequence. And when I say bad consequence, I don't mean detrimental. I mean a consequence that we know they can live with, we know we can live with, but they need to learn from that. I'll give you an example. Your team comes to you and says, listen, when it comes to me doing school work, this is how I like to work. I like to lay on my bed, work in my room, and do my work like that. That's how I like to work. We want them to do well in school. I'm using a very low level, but within the family, right? Low level. We want them to do well in school. We know from our experience that may not be the most conducive to being a successful student. How many of us would get into a conflict with our teen about that behavior and keep telling you need to, this? Many of us would, right? We would get into a conflict with them around that. What would it look like if we let them do it and realize that in that course, in that assignment, they didn't do as well as they thought they might do? Low stake, but valuable lesson. And we didn't even have to get into a conflict about it. But that is respect. Because then that youth might be able to come back to us and say, hey, you know what? You know, when you told me X, Y, and Z, and I didn't listen, now I understand why. Many of us, we come back to our parents and say that when we are 30, 40 years old, you know, when you told me that 20 years ago, I should have listened. What would it look like if our youth were able to come and tell us that in their teens? Because we gave them the room to learn and grow and created a space where if you make a mistake, this is where you can come back. Because respect for our youth has to be one of the things that we are sharing. When you model how to disagree and still stay close to them, you're showing them how they can disagree with each other and still be in a good relationship. Because for many of us, we disagree and then we freeze them out. All right, you want to do it like that? Go do it like that. And then we freeze them out. For real. They don't do what we want to do, so we say, okay, fine, do it your way. But then all they're getting from us is coldness and silence. We're not teaching them how to disagree and still have a relationship. We're teaching them how to disagree and hold a grudge. What are we seeing now? How to disagree and hold a grudge elevated. We have to shift what it means to respect disagreement, because we don't model that. So the first thing is to model, right? So all of this is under modeling. Of course, I know you were going to say something here about I'm giving you a alley-oop, right? This is something about the developmental psyche of kids. I know you wanted to share something. Oh, I didn't have my mic on all this time. I didn't want to share something about the developmental psyche of kids. You want to share anything about that? I'm getting it. So, of course, he was a psych major. And he said, so I was asking him, hey, you know what? There's a topic I have to talk about, conflict resolution among the youth. And he almost said, why are you doing it? So that might have been a close statement, but go ahead.
I don't know if I particularly recall saying that.
Carry on, sir. Carry on.
Yeah, so as a member of the youth, I am here representing us, but I am going to speak on the psychological development of children and just youth in general and how that might play into their decision making. So psychologically, a child's brain is not on. You can't hear me?
You can come sit up. You can come up here. Yeah, this, you know what? I mean, that's the real speak. You got it? Yeah.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Is this better? Okay. So psychologically, a child's brain is not on the same level of decision making as an adult. This is usually why there are certain laws prohibiting children from engaging in certain illicit activities that might cause them to do, unfavorable things. So a child's brain does not fully develop until age 25. That's on average. Of course, there are outliers, depending on gender or just depending on the child itself. But that's on average, a child's brain is not fully developed until age 25. Specifically, the prefrontal cortex, and then within that, the prefrontal lobe. As a whole, the frontal lobe plays a role in a higher level of executive and cognitive functions like emotions, impulse control, problem solving, social interaction, and motor function. All of these would certainly factor into a child's capability to make decisions that have their best interests at heart. Knowing this, we can see that a child would lack the capacity to make informed decisions. Now, this isn't to absolve the youth of any and all wrongdoing, but rather to highlight the fact that they are on a completely different level psychologically. An effective way of dealing with conflict, taking this into account, is to work with them where they are. And this isn't only for young children. A number of children on their way to young adulthood lack impulse control and proper decision-making skills. This also ties into last week's point about how one's resolution of conflict or one's perspective on a situation may not look exactly the same as another's. With most issues, determining the root cause of an issue will gain more fruitful results than simply skimming the tip of the iceberg. And this goes beyond just their decision-making skills. A child's reason for making a rash decision may seem minimal to an adult, but if they literally do not have the proper framework to make said decision, then that provides a further issue to be worked on. Yeah, that's.
I think that could have been the whole lecture there. Y'all have questions? I don't even know what I want to say after this. Y'all have questions, man? I've been running my gum all this time, and that really is a big part of it, right? Like, I think that's a. So again, I just to underscore what Corson was saying here, right? It's not about, and this is not me, this is just underscoring it, right? It's not about absolving or saying there's no responsibility, but meeting them where they are, right? That a big part of this is learning. It is still developing, so it's learning, right? And helping them to learn. And this is what all of the conversation that I was starting up with is leaning into. So, question, sorry. No, go ahead. Oh, I don't even know if I was going to, because it's 6:32, so I need to. So if conflict is a natural part of the reaction, then, so I'll just name these things when you're in the conflict with the child, and then wrap this up, because kids are getting restless too. Let them have their say and really listen. So for many of us, when we're in conflict with our youth, we listen to do what? To respond. We don't listen to understand their perspective. Because in our minds, their perspective isn't really the most valid perspective, because if you had a valid perspective, you wouldn't be doing that nonsense that you were doing that is causing us to have this conversation anyway. So why would I even listen to you? That's our thinking. And that's the thinking that we have to shift. You do.
I have mid-teens, and when you're like going back and forth with them, they're not logical, but now that you say what you're saying, I think it's just them wanting me to respect their decision and their independence. That's all it's about. Because you'd be like, you don't even know what you're talking about, but they want that reaction. That's the reaction from them really saying, I want my own independence.
Right.
Not giving it to you.
So what I'm hearing, so what Safwan just mentioned, what named here is that, in youth, that what they are asking for when they're doing this back and forth is their own independence and their own respect, right? And that's absolutely important, because they're human beings, and every human being wants respect. Every human being wants to be trusted, right? And if you're not trusting them with a simple thing as making a decision, and I'm saying simple just for the sake of using the word simple here, but if you're not trusting them with something that they do all the time, they make more decisions without us than they do with us. For real. They make more decisions without us than they do with us. And majority of the decisions that they make are successful ones. Is that a fair statement to make? Yeah. So Just like us, we make a lot of good, successful decisions, and we make jacked up decisions too. They do the same thing. So one thing I'm gonna push on is, it's not that they're not being logical, it's that they're being logical within the framework and schema that they have, within the worldview that they have. This is how logic is working for them in this moment. But when we have more information, we have a different logic map. If I have this amount of information, then my logic is here. If I have this amount of information, then my logic will look different. But it's all making decisions. Fair enough? So that's what we want to keep in mind, right? That as we are having these things with kids, look at them as they're making logical decisions with the information, knowledge, and framework and abilities that they have now. And how do we help them grow beyond that? Be open about your feelings. So when you're having a disagreement, name your feelings to your youth. Many of us don't name our feelings. So if we are not naming them, then they won't name them themselves. So name our own feelings when we're in the, be vulnerable with our youth so that they can in turn replicate that and show that with others, right? I'm at time, so the thing I want to leave you with is there are a number of programs that are coming up now that teach youth in the communities how to be problem solvers themselves. And not just how to be problem solvers, but how to be conflict interveners. That among themselves, they are the ones who are trained to manage conflict so that when their peers have conflict, their peers don't come to an adult, they actually come to somebody in their own age group. And this is what we are seeing in a number of these youth programs that we have. That is not the adult who's running the program who is the conflict intervener. It is actually someone in their own age group who understands them, who lives their reality, who can come and say, bruh, we could do that differently. So one of the things that I want to push us to and leave us with is, as a community, how can we fund, develop, create programs where our youth are paid to learn how to be conflict interveners? So they get money to actually learn a skill that can even make them money later on, right? We have this big thing called workforce development and all of that stuff. This is part of that. So there are programs that teach them how to be community advocates, restorative justice practitioners, mediators, whatever we want to. All of these are different things that they do. What if we actually paid them to learn this so that they then became the people who know how to do? All of our communities have had these guys and women, people who we go to when something is jumping off. I need to help me squash this. We've always had these people in our communities. This is just taking that same idea and expanding it a bit more, giving more people the skills and the ability to do that. Instead of leaving it with the one who has just earned all of the respect of everyone, so that's the one who we bring in to do everything. What if we expanded that a bit more, right? Go ahead.
Well, I don't know time, so
A challenge, go ahead.
So kind of from what you were talking about earlier, because I know when I was young, hindsight, as you were saying, as an adult, a lot of the Islamic advice my father gave me makes sense to me. But when I was younger, to me, it was expressed more with anger because he obviously knew what traps I was falling in. I find it difficult to find a way to steer my son with that or my children with that, knowing that they're going to be affected in the outside world. When they go to work, when they go with friends, things that I feel like will take them, it's hard to, how do I try to give advice and make an impact, but at the same time, don't sacrifice I kind of got off page there.
No, you're good.
Let me, how can I get on the same page with my child without, while he may feel like I'm taking his ability to be a man and make decisions?
Good. So, as we parent, right? Let me take this back to the Prophet ﷺ, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he was the best of creation. And what was he sent as? A mercy, an example, and a warner. Even him, his role was bounded within a framework. If we look at Musa alayhi salam, if we look at Nuh alayhi salam, right? Nuh, 900 years, 900 times, 9 times how long any of us will live. Messenger of God for 100 years or so. And his son still ignored him. His son still said, bro, you go sail in that wood thing. I'm over here. I'm saying that to say this. The most we can do with our kids is set boundaries and advise them. But at a certain age, when they get to puberty and when they get to a teenager, and this is even within our tradition, we befriend them in a very different way. We start treating them like adults. Like we give them the advice, we remind them of all of the things that we've showed them, but then we let them do what they have to do. As much as it pains us. As much as it pains us. Because what else can we do? The other thing that we can do is keep forcing them, and as we force them, we create a bigger gap where they stop coming to us. And then we start hearing about things. But if they really see us as someone who, yes, I know Abby wants my best interest, but I know he also respects my decision making. Right? If we are doing that for them, then inshallah, they are going to be empowered to make good and right decisions. And this is a point I want to make early on, and I really do need to stop soon. In all of the ways that we've been taught how to manage conflict or not taught how to manage conflict, the word that I thought about early on was empowerment. We have not empowered our youth to manage conflict, and we haven't empowered them to really make good decisions for themselves that we respect. So if we don't empower them to make decisions that we can respect, then they won't make decisions that we respect. You with me? And I know your case might be a bit more complicated than this, but we always say that answering a question in general in a room is always difficult. There might be more nuances to get into there, but I'm hoping some of these broad strokes can give some ideas of what we can start considering to do in order to start changing or modeling how we want them to think about it. And we do have to, our kids are our trust. They're our trust until they become adults. When they hit the age of puberty, they become, in the eyes of Islam, they are their own person. They become responsible. This is not me saying you just let your hands go. But the same way their responsibility shifts as they get older is the same way our approach to them needs to shift as they get older. Has to. Because if it's not doing that, then we won't really help them make good decisions and empower them to be the type of people we want them to be. Does that answer the question a bit? It does? You know, I'm always scared with you, Siddiq, right? I always hope I answer your question. Folks, I know you're ready to tell me I'm talking too much, and I know I've lost all of the kids. Every last child in here I've lost, and some of the adults too. So I was good for the first 20 minutes. So my hope is that we are leaving with some nuggets, and but Myron, I will put some of these things in a document that you can take away, right? That not today, but at the end of it, I'll put some of it together so that you can take away. I hope we're leaving with some things that we can look at when it comes to working with the youth, right? So big takeaways, big strokes, guideposts. What are we modeling? If we are not modeling how to manage emotions and how to respond in conflict, then our youth cannot follow it. If we are not modeling it, they can't do it. They won't do it. Right? Just like anything else they learn, they're going to learn it from somewhere. And if they're learning it not from us, and we have them learning it elsewhere, then the way you resolve conflict publicly is not going to benefit them or you. Fair enough? Right? And so modeling it, respect, and so modeling it, giving them respect, and really helping them and listening to them, right? Those are the things I really spend some time focusing on. I'll leave with one statement from the Sunnah of our beloved Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So there was a child nicknamed Abu Umair. He had a pet sparrow, and his pet sparrow died. And when the Prophet ﷺ learned that the young boy was grieving over the death of his sparrow, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, "O Abu Umair, what happened to little sparrow?" Now the Prophet ﷺ already knew that the bird was dead. But what do you think? Why do you think he asked him what happened to the bird? To show empathy and just give him a chance to speak. Many of us, taking this example in our context, many of us, if we hear something sad has happened to our child, we would jump in to try to console them and give them advice, to help them feel better, because we don't want to see our kids in pain, right? We want to tell them something to help them feel better. When the thing that they may really need in that moment is just to say what happened and be sad. Not necessarily to be told, hey, it's going to get better, but just to be sad in that moment. And then later on, we can reassure them. So before we jump to the solution that we think they need, hear their emotion, see what they want, see what empathy is. Very seldom does empathy happen with us talking. Very seldom is empathy achieved with us being the one doing most of the talking. Fair enough? Empathy has to be something that we feel, and if we are talking, then doing most of the talking, then we are not really connecting with empathy. They have to be the ones sharing. Folks, I need to stop now. With that, inshallah, I stop. I pray that something good comes out of this. I pray that Allah benefits us by what has been shared. I pray that anything that is good, that we are rewarded by it, and anything that is that was incorrect, that Allah forgives me for it, and that it was from myself and from the shaitan. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين. Assalamu alaikum everyone online. See you soon.